I am speaking to our state Senator Bruce Tarr, as I do every week. Good afternoon, Senator. It's Monday, June 7th. How are things on Beacon Hill?
Well, good afternoon, Heather. It's great to be with you. And I will tell you, like on Cape Ann, it's very hot on Beacon Hill, but I'm glad that the State House has air conditioning, and I'm happy to be experiencing that right now.
Well, I do not have air conditioning, as a testament to the fan over there and the open windows. And sometimes my hair blows, apparently, because of the wind or the breeze. It's not a wind. Let's talk about what's going on there. There's a lot of conversation about how to spend the $5 billion coming from the American Rescue Plan in the state of Massachusetts. And there's now kind of a disagreement between the legislature and the governor about who can spend that and how. Do you want to talk about that? I know something just happened in the Senate today, right?
Well, sure. And so in many states, what's happened is the money has come and the executive branch has expended it. But what we're going to do is be able to have a more inclusive process. And so what happened today is the House and the Senate had agreed, and we executed the agreement today to put the $5+ billion into an account, and will appropriate from that account using the regular appropriations process, which means that the House and the Senate will conduct appropriations, think of it as a budget process, and then the governor will be included as well, because the governor will ultimately have to approve or disapprove or make changes to whatever spending bill reaches his desk with regard to this funding. So as opposed to it being a sort of a unilateral process with the executive branch only, it will now be a process with the House and the Senate and the executive branch. And this is a very, very substantial amount of money. And so there's going to be a lot of process around this. And I think that's the way that it should be. There should be lots of public input and a lot of decision making that is including a lot of different perspectives in how we spend this money. But what happened today doesn't spend the money. It merely puts it into an account so that it can be spent. And I think it's important to understand that that account was actually created prior to today. We had anticipated needing an account of this sort, so it had been created, and today we just moved the money into it.
Did the federal government send this money with any sort of messaging on how to spend it within the state?
So that's a great question. Actually, much more money is coming into the state than these 5+, and I'm using plus because there was a change in the number. And the reason for the change is because the governor had pointed out that there are a few communities that did not get treated fairly by the distribution that came directly to cities and towns. And so the governor has sent that money to those communities and is in the process of doing that prior to what happened today. So what's going into this account is not the total of discretionary funding that came from the federal government. It's the total minus what's going out to those few communities. And so what's now happening is that the money that's going into this account is fairly discretionary. So there was a huge amount of money that went into various silos. For instance, educational money went into something called ESSER. There was ESSER 1 and ESSER 2, and now there's a coming soon an ESSER 3. So there were money that went into silos that are not included. Those funds are not included in this much more discretionary funding. Now, there still are some requirements. We can't use it arbitrarily on anything that we choose to, but we have much, much more discretion, which is why it's going into this account so that we can have an appropriations process.
Well, moving on, there's some great news about the state revenues recently, right?
Really, almost shockingly great, Heather. We've been concerned about the transition out of COVID-19 and businesses reopening and the economic recovery that we hope is going to unfold. And I was just looking at the May revenue collections numbers, which are sent to us by Department of Revenue. And in order to put this into context, we have a benchmark that we set upon which our budget is based. So we say that we're going to anticipate collecting this amount of money, and this is the amount we're going to spend in our budget, so that those two things track each other and we don't get out of balance. Well, the May revenue numbers are $2.109 billion above the benchmark we had set for May. And that is such a large number, it's almost hard to digest. And so it signals that things are recovering quickly. There's a lot of revenue coming into the state. Now, some of this may be the result of delayed tax returns as well. So we don't want to become unrealistic about what this represents, because obviously we had delayed things and returns are coming in late and DOR is processing them. But what it does suggest is that we are collecting a very substantial amount of revenue that I think will help to propel spending on our priorities and make sure that we have a balanced budget. And one of the things that I'm very interested in as we look at the budget is to try to, if possible, put some more money back into the stabilization fund, because we are drawing on it heavily. We need to be able to balance the budget. But my hope is now that we're seeing this trend, we can start to put some deposits in the stabilization fund so that we have a cushion, so that we have some protection if we see a downturn in the future.
Mm. And how much did we leave left in the stabilization fund?
Well, there are different numbers. The governor's budget proposal would leave somewhere around $855 million, just short of $1 billion. The House Ways and Means, or the House final budget, was a little bit more than that. So that was in the $900 million range. And I'm very pleased that the Senate's budget proposal would leave about $1.15 billion. But the important thing to think about is, before the pandemic, through a series of rebuilding actions that we had taken, we had about $3.5 billion in the fund. So it's been significantly depleted. And again, the reason we have that fund is that when we encounter something like the pandemic, we can infuse money from the fund into the budget and prevent major disruptions in the things that we fund as state government. But that being said, now that we're down to those levels of less than $1 billion, which in 2 of the 3 budget proposals, that's what we have, it really is time that we start to think about being able to put some money back into the stabilization fund.
And as I understand it, money from the federal government, from the American Rescue Plan, cannot be used to reinvest in the stabilization fund.
That has been what we understand so far. However, I'm continuing to explore that, because I think it could be a valuable use of that funding, particularly when we see revenues coming in, $2.1 billion above benchmark. So there's a lot we need to think about, and we need to really strive for balance of being able to try to rebuild the stabilization fund, try to continue the operations of state government, and maybe even think about what we can do to take advantage of the federal government's spending on us to be able to build infrastructure and do other kinds of things that we might not otherwise ever have the opportunity to do. So all those things need to fit together. And that's what we're going to be spending some time at. And that's why you saw the House and the Senate put the federal money into an account so we can look at it carefully and then decide how to spend it.
Hmm. And everyone is really looking forward to learning what COVID rules get to stay and what COVID rules we don't get to keep anymore, because there were some good ones, right?
There absolutely are. And we've been hearing from a lot of folks about them, both the ones that they like and the ones that they don't like. There are some that have a fair amount of consensus. And I'll tell you, the one that I think has the most consensus is the issue of allowing restaurants to continue outdoor dining. And so I actually filed that as a budget amendment. I've also filed it as a standalone bill. But what is going to happen with that one and many other issues is they're going to be rolled into a bill that will likely be released tomorrow by the Senate Committee on Ways and Means. And the goal of that bill is not to make these things permanent, but to extend them so that we can have a very organized, structured process around deciding which things should be made part of the permanent landscape and which things should be allowed to expire. So right now, here in my office and in other legislators' offices, we're all looking at all of those emergency things and trying to figure out what should be extended. And I anticipate that Thursday is going to be a very busy day in the House and the Senate, because it's likely that that's the day we're going to take up these extension bills. It'll probably be one bill with many, many sections relative to lots of different things. And again, the goal is to extend them so that we'll have time to carefully consider them. And I actually think that's a wise way to move forward. And one of the reasons we have to do it fairly quickly is because the public health order that the governor issued relative to COVID-19 is something that many of these emergency orders are tied to. And that order is going to expire on June 15th. So if we want things to continue, we have to put that continuation in place before then.
I know everyone just loves the outdoor dining. So let's keep our fingers crossed about that one.
I will make a prediction that that one is going to meet with very strong success in the legislative process. Something that's a little bit more controversial, however, is the idea of delivered cocktails or cocktails for takeout, where that was considered to be something done to help us get through the emergency when there weren't many other options and restaurants needed that. It is much more of a debate now as to how far that should continue. So again, there are lots of things all across the spectrum. Another one that's getting a lot of attention is how we do local meetings. So for instance, our select board meetings, should they be able to continue with some or all of the meeting being conducted remotely? And there's a fair amount of consensus that, at least for now, that needs to be continued. And maybe that will become a permanent accommodation. So there are things that touch a lot of aspects of our lives, and we're going to be considering most, if not all of them, this week.
Well, there's a lot going on. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us.
My pleasure. I look forward to reporting next week with you on how many of these things got passed and what happened. So it's a very interesting time. And again, I think the goal here is going to be continuity, not having too many disruptions in our lives. And I look forward to telling you about that soon and being able to see some more of that great Cape Ann breeze come through the window in the background.
Yeah, let's hope there's more of that.